In each of the last 10 lives before he became the Buddha in training, known as the Potisattawa, had to maximize each one of his paramitas. And each corresponding life, he dedicated himself to one paramita. Prince Temiya was the paramita of Nekkama, or renunciation. And so let us hear the story of how renunciation at the maximum value, at the highest level, how difficult this is. If you will remember, we talked about each paramita having 3 separate levels. You have the regular level, you have the difficult level, and then you have the unbelievable level. This is the unbelievable level. Yet this is what our Buddha had to do before he was eligible to become a Buddha. So let us get to the story. So once upon a time, there was a king named Kasi Raja. He had 16,000 wives. However, none of his wives were able to bear him a son. He was stressed out, he was worried, he was angry. He asked all the wives to pray to their gods and ask for a son. Some people prayed to the moon, some people prayed to the sun, some people prayed to whatever gods and spirits they believed in. Yet no one was able to conceive a son. Now his chief queen, named Janta Devi, she also was asked to reflect and ask for a son. Now she didn't ask any gods. She had lived a very holy and good life. She'd done no evil in her life. She'd never killed, stole, misconduct, bad speech. She was kind, she was generous. She knew that she had lived a good life. Now, when asked to pray to gods, what she ended up doing was, so she turned around and reflected on herself. She said, if I have truly been a good person, if I have truly lived a virtuous life, then may I be blessed with a son. Now, according to the legend, one of our highest spirits, if you want to call it a god with a lowercase g, is called Sakka, S-A-K-K-A. He's known as the guardian god. Now, he doesn't really deal with humans very often, but if a holy person, a good person, is in distress, suddenly the saying goes that his chair will become very hot. And when his chair becomes hot, he's sitting there chilling on his couch, he's going to feel like, ooh, something's going on in the world. A holy being, a virtuous person is in trouble. It's my job to look out for them. So he looked down into earth and saw that this queen, who had been a good person her whole life, was in trouble. She needed a son. And she was asking for it by reflecting on what she's done. And she deserves it. So he went to the Bodhisattva, who was sitting in heaven. They call it the heaven of the 33 gods. It just so happened, though, that the Potisattawa wasn't there randomly. He had just been born recently, and he spent 20 years as a great king. While he was a king, though, he had to decide cases, he had to execute people, he had to punish criminals. And because of all those actions, he got sentenced himself to hell, in a very low level of hell, for 80,000 years. So he had just finished being a lavish king for 20 years, of which he ended up being punished for 80,000 years of a horrendous, unbelievable hell life. And after that hell life, he was reborn in the heaven of the 33. At that point, Sakka, the guardian, went to the Potisattawa in heaven of the 33 and said, I know you're comfortable here, but if you were to go to earth right now and be born, this is a perfect time for you to finish one of your paramitas so that you can achieve your ultimate goal of being a Buddha and help the population of human beings. And he reflected on it and he says, yeah, you're right, makes sense. I will go. So he accepted the invitation. He came down into the stomach of the queen. It was said that when the Bodhisattva entered the queen's womb, it felt like it was full of diamonds. And so at that point, the queen knew that she had become pregnant. Now, not only that, because the Potisattawa traveled to earth and was born, so 500 other young men were all born a little bit after him. And so the chief queen had the prince, whereas all the other women in the court, 500 other women, each had 500 sons at the same time. And so those 500 were considered his friends or his team or people that would grow up to be his servants. The king was super excited and very happy that he had achieved what he wanted, which was he finally has a son. He had a big party, he had a big celebration, and everyone was so happy and so excited. So the king was so excited, and as customary of kings, they give rewards. And so he gave a reward to all those women who had the children, and he gave rewards to all the young men that were born. He gave them clothes, money, servants, to help protect these 500 youths when they grow up so they can help be friends to our young prince. So he went to his queen, the woman who gave birth to his son, and said, "I grant you one wish. Any wish, any request that you have will be granted." Now the queen, at that moment in time, didn't want anything, but she was wise and she was smart. So she said to the king, "I request to hold on to my wish until a future date." He also appointed 64 wet nurses to help breastfeed the prince. However, he had a lot of criteria that needed to be met before someone could be a wet nurse. They had to be not too tall, not too short, not too thin, not too fat. They cannot have hanging breasts or sagging breasts, cannot be too dark-skinned or too light-skinned, cannot have sour milk or bitter milk. And in the book, they actually explained why. He said he did not want a woman who was too tall, because when she breastfed the prince, the child's neck will grow to be too long. He did not want a woman who was too short, because when she was breastfeeding the prince, his shoulders will compress. He did not want a woman who was too thin, because the baby's thighs will ache when he has to squeeze the thighs around the hips of the woman. He did not want a woman who was too fat, because the baby's legs will be bow-legged. He did not want a woman who had sagging, hanging breasts, because the ends of the nose would be flattened. He did not want a woman who was too dark, because her milk would be too cold. He did not want a woman who was too white, because her milk would be too hot. And of course, sour and bitter milk for the taste. And so, however they decided, they figured out these 64 perfect women of these qualities to be wet nurses for his prince. Now, while all this was happening, it just so happened that the quote-unquote police officers of those days had just caught 4 robbers and brought them to the king. And as customary and the job of the king, he had to decide their fate. And so during that party, he took a short intermission and decided the life of 4 robbers. He sentenced the first robber to 1,000 strokes, to be whipped 1,000 times. He sentenced the second robber to be imprisoned for life in chains. He sentenced the third robber to be killed by a spear. He sentenced the fourth robber to be killed by impaling. While he did this, the people around him didn't seem to be affected by it very much. Everyone considered this normal and not a big deal. Robbers were bad, robbers are jerks, they hurt people, they got caught, they got punished. It's the king's job, not a big deal, no whoopee, not exciting. However, let us not forget the prince's mind state. He had just come from 80,000 years in hell of like complete and utter torture. It's very important that we picture this and we remember this concept. So he was in hell for 80,000 years. 20 years as a king equated to 80,000 years of punishment for his actions. And he immediately saw that, look, if I'm the prince and I'm the chief prince, when I get older, 16 years old, I will be given the kingdom. Once I am given the kingdom, I will have to act as a king. People will be bad. People will do bad things. I will have to punish them. And even though it's my job, I will be punished for punishing them. I just came from hell. I do not want to go back at all. And so he started stressing out very intensely. According to the story, and we could take it one of both ways, we can listen to the story or we can kind of look at it a different way. The story says that there was a spirit who was residing in his umbrella. So they had an umbrella above the crib of the baby, and so that there was a spirit who resided there for a long time. That spirit had been a mother to this son, this child, many, many lives ago. But even though the son had been reborn many times, the woman, or the spirit woman, remembered her son. And so when she saw him stressed out, she gave him advice. She says that you should pretend to be crippled, pretend to be deaf, and pretend to be dumb, which is mute and not very smart. He said, this makes sense, because if I'm crippled, if I'm handicapped, if I'm deaf, if I'm mute, if I'm mentally, not developed or dumb, they wouldn't want me to be king, and I'll be free. That's a very great idea. So he decided to go with it. And so suddenly from that moment on, he was crippled. He couldn't move on his own. He couldn't speak. He didn't hear anything. His eyes had no reaction. He forced himself to become a completely unconscious person. Now, the problem was, people were not dumb. People looked at his face, and his face is beautifully perfect. His body is strong and energetic, and his limbs and his legs are not deformed. His ears are perfectly developed. There's nothing wrong with this kid. He has no symptoms of having any of these handicaps. And so they didn't believe him. Well, no matter what they did, he didn't respond. So they started making plans. On his first year, they decided to withhold milk. So they brought all 500 other babies, young men, and put them all together. And this was how they gauged it. Let's call it a control group. So they had 500 babies and him. Well, whenever the babies got hungry, what do? They screamed and yelled and cried for milk. But the Prince Temiya did not. He was hungry, and he wanted his milk. But he told himself one thing. He said, is milk worth 80,000 years in hell? I remember how bad it was. No amount of milk is worth it. It's better to go hungry and die than to have to do evil and then be punished for it accordingly. I would rather die than have to go back to hell again for 80,000 years. No matter what happened, he wouldn't cry for milk. Well, you would think that he would probably die then, but he didn't, because of the love of a mother. His mother watched him be silent, and his mother's heart broke. Watching her son not get any milk, watching her son seemingly be hungry but not crying for milk, therefore not getting any milk, she couldn't take it. So she ordered all 64 wet nurses to feed her son. And so they would test him for a while, and then she would break. And she would say, feed my son. So they would feed her son. Then they would try to test him again, because they wanted to prove that he wasn't broken. And he would stay strong. So for the full year, they tested him with milk. Then on his next year, they decided, kids at this age, 2 years old, they like cake and dainties, like little desserts and candy and stuff that are delicious. So they brought all 500 control group children, let's just call them the control group, and put them onto a big room and put out all the best cakes and desserts and dainties. All the kids were yelling and screaming and excited and giggling and laughing. But Prince Temiya had no reaction. He just sat there, no reaction. When all the other kids were eating all of these desserts, he had no reaction. So once again, his mother came to the rescue. After watching her son not eating anything, watching her son not getting anything to eat, she ordered the nurses to feed him after some time. Then in the next year, they decided that kids at this age, 3 years old, probably like fruit. It's something that kids like. So they brought all the best fruits in the whole country and tested him. They had the control group there, and all the control group kids ran in there and ate all the fruit and went wild and crazy and happy and excited. Yet, for Prince Temiya, he had no reaction. Then they decided that kids at 4 years old, the next year, like toys, playthings. So they brought him all these golden elephants and toys and silver and all these little toys that kids would like to play with. And they tested it on the control group kids. So the kids all came in, played with all the toys, had a blast. Prince Temiya didn't even look at the toys, didn't even think about the toys. And in each of these years, all he kept telling himself was, is this worth 80,000 years in hell? Are cakes worth 80,000 years in hell? Are fruits worth 80,000 years in hell? Is getting to play with a toy worth 80,000 years in hell? No, it's not. On his 5th year, they decided to bring special food that was specially made for 4 or 5 years old. So they brought the food, all the kids ate it, he didn't. Same thing, it's not worth it. Then on his 6th year, they decided that maybe we can't get him with pleasure. Let's get him with fear. So they built a little hut, and they had straw on all 4 sides of the walls. They put him right in the middle with all the 500 babies as the control group, and they lit the whole house on fire. And they waited and waited till the fire burned all the walls, the ceiling. The kids who were 4 or 5 years old freaked out, screaming, yelling, running around, knocking each other over, trying to get out of the house. The one child who did not move, did not avoid, did not scream, did not cry, did not tremble, did not leave, was the prince. So for him, he said, the fires in hell are way hotter than this. The pain that I had to endure was way worse than being burned alive. I am not going back to hell, no matter what. And so when the fire got so close to him that he was gonna get in trouble, his mother couldn't take it and ordered the soldiers to go in there and bring him out. So they tried this a couple times in the year. These weren't just one-time things. They tried it 3 or 4 times a year to see if, they could get him. The next year, they decided that a lot of people are afraid of wild elephants. So they had an elephant trained, and they trained the elephant to attack the prince, but within reason. Had the elephant run at the prince, stomp the ground really hard, walk around him, but don't step on him, pick him up with the elephant's trunk, and spin him around. But no matter what, the prince had no response. The next year, they had serpents. They pulled out all the fangs, they pulled out all the poison, and they let loose a bunch of serpents. All the children freaked out, ran away, but the prince didn't. The serpents coiled around the prince, squeezed him, no reaction. Opened their mouths really wide and engulfed his head. No reaction. Now at this point, can you imagine if it was us? At any of these points in time, if we had to encounter these things, can you imagine our reactions to these? The next year, they decided that around 9 or 10-year-old children like shows, like gatherings. So they had a big party, and they invited mimes who came and performed. All the kids were giggling and laughing, and this is so amazing. This show is so awesome. And the prince says, I'm going to trade hell for watching a show. I'm going to trade the pains of 80,000 years of hell just for this. No way, man. No way. The next year, they hired a warrior to secretly come into the kingdom and attempt to kill the prince with a sword. He had a huge sword, swung it around, attacked the prince, and the prince didn't react. Even when the sword was sitting on his neck, around his head, no reaction. Then the next year, they made him a bed, and they put curtains on all 4 sides, and they cut small holes in the curtain, and they put conch shells on each side. Randomly in the middle of the night, randomly in the middle of the day, randomly without any warning, they would blow the shells really loud to surprise him, to see if they could get him to react. And he didn't for a whole year. The next year, they tried bright lights and lamps, which they would turn on randomly in the darkness, and they just turn on all the lights to see if they could get a reaction. No reaction. Now they're getting desperate. Now we're hitting his 13th year, and they're getting very desperate. So they decided to up it up another notch. So they covered his whole body in honey and molasses, and then they brought a bunch of ants to bite him. And so these ants crawled all over him, into his ears, into all his orifices, every part of his body and just bit him like crazy. He got blisters and he got bug bites and he was in a tremendous amount of pain. But all he could think about was, the pain that I'm experiencing now is nothing compared to the 80,000 years of pain I had in hell. I'm not going to give in. Then, the next year, they decided that young men like cleanliness. No one wants to be stinky or smelly or dirty. So what they did was, they just left him alone. When he pooped, they didn't clean it for him. When he urinated himself, they didn't clean it for him. They let flies fly around him. They let his body get dirty, the dust, the dirt on him. They didn't clean him. And instead, they let people tease him. They let people make fun of him. It's like, Prince, you're a young man now. How are you going to let yourself be so disgusting, so smelly, so dirty? But the prince endured it. He said, it's not worth it. It's not worth it. It's not worth 80,000 years in hell. And so finally, the people around him and the children around him couldn't take his smell, couldn't take the filth and the disgust that was about his body, that they cleaned him. Then, on his 15th year, they decided to torture him again, to test him. They put pans of fire under his bed and lit it on fire. And they just let it burn there under his bed until his body started boiling. They had little boils on his body. He had sores. He had, issues with his body. But he took it. Once again, all he said was, the fires in hell are a lot hotter than this. I've already endured 80,000 years. I'm not going back. Finally, on his 16th year, they were running out of things to think about. So they decided the one thing that young men can never fight, the one thing that is the bane of all men's existence, is women. So they hired thousands and thousands of the hottest, beautiful, sexy, talented women in the world. From musicians to dancers to courtesans and prostitutes to every type of woman they could think of. And they offered the kingdom to them. Any one of you that can get a physical response from the prince will be given the kingdom as the queen. Because once he has a physical response, that means he's not broken. Once he's not broken, we'll give him the kingdom. Once we give him the kingdom, you get to be the queen. So you can imagine that every single girl, every single woman tried her best. Whether it was music, dancing, rubbing, touching, anything you can think of, they tried. Now the prince was scared. He knew that he was a young man. He knew that he had feelings and he had desires like anyone else. So he knew that the pleasure that he got from women would not be worth the 80,000 years in hell. And so what he did was he held his breath until his body became stiff, like almost like a board, like as if he was dead. And the women started freaking out, like there's something wrong with him. His body is like stiff. Like you can't get a reaction out of him. He looks like he's dying, like someone needs to help him. He's not breathing. And so they all gave up. At this point, the prince was considered an adult. He was 16 years old, and this is the age that prince usually becomes the king. And the king called all the advisors who, when the prince was born, had said that the prince would be the great king, would be healthy, would be strong, would be wise. And the king says, what's up with your forecast? You guys gave us, a fortune telling that he'd be perfect, he's the best, he's healthy. You didn't say he's going to be crippled. You didn't say he was going to be broken. You didn't say there's something wrong with my son. So what's up with that? Well, those guys immediately changed their story and said, we didn't want to hurt your feelings the first day. We didn't want to scare you, but your prince is actually bad luck. He's an ill omen. So if you can't get him to become the king, you got to kill him. So at this point in time, the king was told to kill the prince, and he was willing to. At this moment in time, the heart of the mother came in and said, I request my wish now. And he says, what do you want? She says, give him the kingdom. He's like, no, he's broken. He's not complete. Give him the kingdom for 7 years then. No, I'm not going to give a broken child my kingdom for 7 years. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 year. No. 12 months. No. 6, 5, A week. Okay, fine. I'll give him the kingdom for 7 days, and then I'm taking it back. And so she went to her son and whispered in his ear and said, my son, I know you're not broken. I know there's nothing wrong with you. I don't know why you're doing this. I don't understand. I've tried everything. I'm willing to die for you. I'm willing to give you anything. What are you doing? Why are you doing this? Stop. They're going to kill you. I can't handle that. And at that moment, the prince thought, how can I hurt this woman so much? She gave me life. How can I hurt her like this? But then he remembered the 80,000 years in hell. I don't want to go back. I can't go back. I can't endure that again. It was too bad. Even hurting my mom this way, it's not worth becoming king and killing people and ordering people's deaths and having to pay for it in hell. And so he withstood it even more. Then, after 7 days passed, the king said, take him out the east door and, bury him in the cemetery. And as you're burying him, hit him on the head with a shovel and kill him. And so the soldiers took him out. Now, at this time, the prince was in the cart, laying broken, pretending to be broken on the cart, being taken out to the cemetery. The closer he got to the cemetery, the harder his heart started beating. And all he could think about was, I'm about to be free. I'm about to be done. I'm about to be free. So at that point in time, while they were digging his grave, he decided to test his body. I'm 16 now, and they are about to kill me. Therefore, that's considered the end of my term. So he moved his fingers, wiggled his toes, blinked his eyes, adjusted his jaw, and checked to see if his body was still working. When he realized it was, he jumped out of the cart. The guys didn't see him or hear him at all. And he wanted to know, am I strong enough? Like, I feel strong. Am I actually strong? And he picked up the whole wagon by himself with one arm. And he's like, oh, okay, yeah, I'm pretty strong. And so as with the wagon in one hand, up in the air, he turns to the soldiers and says, am I the one you want to kill? And they look back at him, this big, strong prince, lifting a wagon with one hand, and they're like surprised, like, who are you? And he says, I'm the prince. I'm the old prince, but I'm free now. Because of the decree to kill me, I'm no longer the prince. Therefore, I'm free. Now, either you can fight me, or you can go back and tell the king that I'm gone, that I'm done. And so all the soldiers are like, well, we're not going to fight you. You can pick up a cart all by yourself with one arm. So they went back to the king to tell the king that the prince was complete and whole again. While those soldiers were traveling back to the kingdom, the prince went into the forest, shaved his head, and entered like a little hermit's hut. He decided to ordain for the rest of his life. Now, when he decided that, he exclaimed out loud, I'm free. I'm free. I'm free. And when he exclaimed this, Saka, the guardian god, felt hot again. So he's like, okay, another holy being is having an issue again. So soon, I just helped this woman, now what's going on? So he came down to earth and saw that the Potisattawa, the person he requested to be born, is now ready to ordain. So he, through his abilities, set up a nice little hut on the edge of the forest for the Potisattawa to sit in, and offered him robes and offered him food, which was in the form of leaves and berries and such. Well, the prince now ordained, and the king came with the whole army, brought the whole city, the wives, the 500 young men, the wet nurses. Everyone wanted to come see the prince who was faking it for 16 years. And when they met the prince, they asked him to go back. They asked him to come back and be the king. And the prince said no. The king thought to himself, I'm going to anoint him as king and then carry him physically away with me. So he spoke these words to the prince and said, my elephants, my chariots, horsemen, and infantry, all of these pleasant things I give to you, my loving son. My queen's apartments I give to you, with all their pomp and pride. You shall be the sole king over all of us. There shall be no one with your power. Beautiful women, skilled in dance and song, and trained for every mood, they shall lay on your lap and please you in every way. Why would you hang out and live longer in these woods? The daughters of your foes shall come to your feet and be your slaves. When they have given you sons, they will inherit your kingdom and continue your lineage. You are my firstborn son and my heir, and you shall receive all the glory that I have as yours. Enjoy the kingdom to the fullest. Why would you linger in this hermitage? The Potisattawa responded, No, let the young man leave the world and fly away from the vanities. The ascetic's life best suits the young. And he counseled all the people. He said, I watched the boy. With childish lips, he, father, mother, cries. Himself begets a son, and then he too grows old and dies. So the young daughter in her flower grows, blithe and fair to see, but she soon fades down, cut by death, like the green bamboo tree. Men, women, all, however young, soon perish. Who in sooth would put his trust in a mortal life, cheated and taken away from youth? As night by night gives place to dawn life, still contracts his span, just like fish in water which dries up, such is the youth of man. This world of ours is sore, is ever watched by some. They pass, and their purposes fall away. Why talk of crowns or thrones? Who wants this world of ours? Who watches it? With what purpose? Tell me this mystery. Death is the one that watches this world. Old age watches at our gate, and at night they pass and they conquer our world. When the lady at her loom sits weaving all day, her task grows ever less and less, and thus our lives waste away. As speeds the hurrying river's course, on and on with no backwards flow, so speeds life of men forward until it runs out. As the river sweeps away trees from the banks uptorn, so are we men by age and death in headlong ruin as our future. When the king listened to this, he was taken by the depth and the concept that was presented to him. All that he's ever thought about was pleasure, happiness, fun, sex, music, food, power. But what he never thought about was death, old age, sickness, loss, pain, suffering, hell. And when he thought about this, he realized he had been living his life blissfully ignorant of what life really is, which is filled with suffering. Guaranteed loss, guaranteed old age, guaranteed illness, and guaranteed death. Yet he had been ignoring it and ignorant of it his whole life. And so at that point in time, he decided that he too would give up his kingdom and join the prince in the forest as a hermit. Well, when his mother heard, she says, well, me too. So ended up having thousands and thousands of people who heard this sermon, all decided to ordain with the great prince. So the kingdom was left unprotected. The kingdom was left unguarded. The treasuries, all the money, the food, the flowers were all left unguarded. A neighboring kingdom they attacked. When they entered the city, there were no soldiers. When they opened the doors, they were already open. They saw all the gold, all the silver, the platters, all laid out with no one touching it and no one concerned. But they heard a gathering out the east door. And so that sent the whole army out to see who is out there. And when they arrived, they saw people sitting together in a bunch of hermit huts on the edge of the forest. And so they went in and asked, What's going on here? Where are all the people in the city? Where are all the people guarding the gold and the silver? And at that point, the prince explained the nature of life, as he explained to the original king. And now another kingdom and their king decided to forsake the old life and live a life of virtue, simplicity, and trying to find a way out of rounds of suffering and rebirth. And so as you can see, as this story concludes, the prince was so dedicated to his path. It didn't mean that he did not want the pleasures. It does not mean that he did not know what pleasures were. He knows what pleasures are. He knows how fun they are, and he wanted them. He had hunger. He had pain. He had fear. Yet, the one thing that he could not forget was the pain of 80,000 years in hell. He couldn't forget that. And thus, he was driven to forsake all the gifts and all the pleasures of the world. Because for him, one word stood out: it's not worth it. No matter how much pleasure, how much bliss, how much sex and food and music and rock and roll, it's not worth it. Because in the end, we all die. In the end, everyone you love will die. In the end, life will end in suffering, fear, pain. Shouldn't we spend our time looking for a way out? Or should we spend our time having fun and then suffering for it later? What would a wise man do? And this is the concept, the paramita of Nekkama. Nekkama, as explained the other day, was the willingness to be alone, the willingness to forsake sensual pleasures, the willingness to fight against your desires, the willingness to forsake your right. You have the right to these things. You have the choice to have these things. You have the ability to have these things, yet you voluntarily choose not to. You choose to train yourself. You choose to become tougher and to be resistant to pleasures. So rather than being a pleasure seeker, you become a pleasure denier. You become a pleasure tolerant person, where you are no longer weak to pleasures, rather you are strong against pleasure. And therefore you can become free from pleasure. It's just like saying someone who smokes cigarettes, does drugs, or overeats. You have the right. You have the freedom and the choice to do these things. You can smoke, you can do drugs, you can drink, you can overeat, you can oversleep, you can be mean, you can be vulgar, you can cheat, you can steal, you can kill. These are all your choices that you can make as a human being. Yet instead of making these choices and then having to pay for it, we choose to forsake our choice and fight against it, to become tolerant against it, tolerant to the pleasures of anger, tolerant to the pleasures of desires, so that we are no longer a slave to it, and eventually we will become free. Thus is the concept of Nekkama and ordination. And so ends the story of the Temiya prince. And that was the life through all 16 years of torment and trials that he had to withstand in order to maximize at the highest level the paramita of renunciation, Nekkama.